military force to use the broad array of his powers to try to hasten the end of the Iranian regime?
I think the president has actually made his position on Iran very clear, and he made that clear when there were the negotiations about the ceasefire, which we know obviously is now in place, and the deadline on that ceasefire has continued. He said that Hamas and Iranian-backed terrorists would have hell to pay if that ceasefire didn't move forward, and then quickly thereafter it did. I also do have news on the hostage front, which I'm very surprised nobody asked about this because it is big news story, and the White House applauds the release of 8 additional hostages from Hamas captivity, thanks to the ceasefire deal secured by President Trump. 3 Israeli and 5 Thai nationals are being reunited with their families and their loved ones after being held in unspeakable conditions for over 15 months. And the president remains committed to the release of all remaining hostages, and they should have never been taken by the brutal terrorist group Hamas in the first place. And I think President Trump's working meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister next week emphasizes his continued support for Israel and ensuring that brutal terrorists in that region have hell to pay. Sure.
Can I just finish the other 2 questions?
Sure.
I know you want the long, ponderous Rosen. But first, on the Grinnell trip, as you know, under the previous administration, the U.S. recognized the opposition candidate in last year's elections, Edmundo Gonzalez, now exiled, as the legitimate president of Venezuela. Does the president's dispatching of Ambassador Grinnell to negotiate directly with President Maduro today mean that the U.S. now officially recognizes President Maduro as the legitimate president of Venezuela?
Absolutely not. As I made it very clear, former ambassador and now special envoy Rick Grinnell is going to Venezuela with 2 very clear directives. Make sure that Tren de Aragua members, of which there are 400 currently in custody, are repatriated back to Venezuela, and that all United States detainees return home. Thank you very much, guys.
Just on the president's use of language in this room yesterday,
Sure.
and without seeking to cast myself as some kind of moral exemplar because it's rather late in the day to try. Nonetheless, this was an event yesterday that began with a moment of silence for the victims of the air crash and the president's own invocation of, quote, a loving God. And then he uncorked that expletive to insult a former cabinet officer. It was the same expletive that I saw him use in the East Room in 2020 when he famously held up the Trump acquitted headline.